Good morning and good afternoon, wherever you are, to this third edition of the DCZ Talks, this time dedicated to the topic food security and biodiversity conservation in China, trade-offs or synergies. Just a very short and few remarks on the background of our event here. We are the Sino-German Agricultural Centre, which is a cooperation project between the two ministries of China, agricultural ministries of China and Germany, that has been established in 2015. We are now already in the third phase. Now, this is implemented by IAK in Germany and the Foreign Cooperation Center, Foreign Economic Cooperation Center in China. I'm very glad that today we can have the support by a very prestigious expert, Professor Harald Schneider presently from the Xishuangbanna Tropical Botanical Garden, to lead us through this interesting webinar. And I'm glad that I can hand over now to you, Professor Schneider, and wish us all a very interesting event. Thank you very much.
Can I take over? Good afternoon, good morning, and I'm Professor Harald Schneider. I have the honor and the pleasure to guide you through this absolutely fantastic and very interesting webinar today. First, I want to thank everyone who helped to organize this event, and special thanks to all the four speakers to be willing to talk today and to contribute to this very interesting discussion. To get a little bit going, I think I want to give a little bit background and start to do a little bit of a basic introduction. Does this work? Okay, now this webinar is very interesting. It's a collaboration between the Sino-German Agricultural Centre, and we heard about the center, what this one is about. I'm representing the other partner, the Xishuangbanna Tropical Botanical Garden. Xishuangbanna is a name which we need to learn to pronounce. Not only for Germans, it's also difficult for a lot of other people to pronounce, because it's actually not a typical Chinese name word. Comes from a little different language background. Xishuangbanna is in the most southwest of China, where we are arguably in the border corner between Laos, Myanmar, and China. It's a multicultural but also biodiversity rich region. I'm representing XTBG, is an Institute of the Chinese Academy of Sciences. My expertise is actually much more in biodiversity, not so much in agriculture. As I said, this is a collaborative project which is linked to the journal which we call Integrative Conservation. Therefore, you can watch this webinar not only via the outline of the DCC, but also via the outline of Integrative Conservation, which is a journal published by XTBG. It's a new journal, and therefore which is published in collaboration with Wiley, and therefore you can see this webinar also via the Wiley. For wherever you are, which way you join, we're very happy that you join this very interesting seminar. Good. Now, I want to point this one here out because German Agriculture, Sino-German Agricultural Centre requires your help because we need also to fill out. If you have time, please copy this survey and fill it out, because it's very important for the center, because we need to document your participation to improve, but also to document our funders that we actually had an audience here. Therefore, please help us here with that. And I want to take this a little bit on, and therefore one thing which is for me very important. I'm originally born in Germany, raised in Germany, but decided now to live in China. And for me, this event very important. This is collaboration with China and Germany, which for me is very close to my heart. That the two home countries of myself work together, therefore, and in a partnership. And when I say that one, if we think about the future of humanity, we are living in a very challenging time, and the topic today is part of that challenge. And when we want to take on the challenge, we need to think, to collaborate, to work together. Otherwise, we will not achieve any success, and we will fail. And actually, because what I'm talking about is the agreement which we call the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which aims to protect biodiversity at first, which was agreed on last year. It was a big event, the COP15, which was a bit delayed, and actually tries to save biodiversity until 2030. It's not many years. I copy here a little text using sources at the bottom. You will see always where the text coming from, because some of this wording is so nice and clear that I don't try to reword it again myself. Biodiversity is defined as a diversity of species, ecosystems, and genes on Earth. That is actually what biodiversity is, if you don't. Sometimes it's important to remind it. The richness of our diversity underpins all aspects of human life, from food, fresh water, to the strength of global economy. Therefore, without biodiversity, our life will be not very nice. And one of the most important sentences is, this is the last decade today for both biodiversity and climate. We don't really change now, we will have no bright future. And the main aim is to, with all that what we try to do, to establish a positive relationship with nature for the benefits of people and planet. Beautiful text written on some of the UN websites. In our context, when we talk about trade-offs, agricultural expansion, which is important to feed people, continues to be the main driver of deforestation, forest degradation, and forest biodiversity loss. Meaning the global food system is one of the main drivers of our biodiversity loss. If we want to talk about using the biodiversity loss, we need to think how we actually take on that challenge. But in turn, we also have to think about other challenges. We have to end hunger, achieve food security, improve nutrition, and promote sustainable agriculture. Therefore, that is actually the other trade-off. We cannot simply protect only biodiversity and forget people. And therefore, the meaning that what we need is secure socio-economic development and prosperity by targeting the unitary target harmony with nature. Therefore, we need to bring this together. And often forgotten is when we have declined biodiversity, this actually threatened food security. Therefore, actually, food security, we have actually also positive feedback or other kind of feedback we have to think about. And preserving global biodiversity requires rapid agricultural improvement. We are sitting in a feedback system between these two elements, biodiversity conservation and agriculture and food security conservation. And only if we bring these two together, we can achieve some of our main aims. And that means the title of this webinar, Biodiversity Food Security, from Trade-off to Synergies, which is actually the title of a paper published a couple of years ago. And I want to take up a piece of the title of one of our speakers today, publication win-win opportunities. Actually, we only have not only trade-offs, we actually may have actually situations where when we bring biodiversity, conservation, and agriculture production together, that we actually get a much better situation and win-win chains. And hopefully some of our colleagues here will enlighten us on the issues. Now, enough for me as a moderator. Actually, I'm not a speaker, but I only moderate, so I should not take too much time. And I'm very pleased about our panel today. We have 4 panel members: Professor Teja Tscharntke from the Georg University Göttingen, Professor for Agroecology. He's a very remote expert in this field, and I'm very, very pleased that Professor Tscharntke accepted to be here today with us online in the digital form. Then we have, as a second panel member, Professor Tianbao, Director of Research Institute of Environmental Law of the Wuhan University, and very well known and highly respected expert in this field. And it's a great pleasure for me that you accepted to be here today. Despite you're certainly a very, very busy man, there's a lot of important things to do. Thank you very much for being here today. Then Professor Martin Welp, from the Professor for Social-Economics and Communication of the Eberswalde University of Sustainable Development, also an expert in this field. And I'm very pleased that we have such a high diversity of contexts. We have agriculture, ecological background, law background, socio-economics, and finally we go outside of academics, go a little bit to more practical applied conditions. We have here the 4th speaker, and who is here physically present in the room today, Ms. Wang, from Foodthink. I'm very pleased about this program. We have 4 excellent experts in the field, which all have different contexts. And I think that's very important, different contexts, because it's a problem, these issues, when we talk about it, need multidisciplinarity and different aspects of the course. From a practical point of view, I want to outline briefly how we want to do that today. The 4 panel members will give each one a short presentation to highlight their take on the topic. In the context to be proper collaborative between nations, we decided that Professor Tscharntke as a first speaker, followed by Professor Qin, then Ms. Wang, and finally Martin Welp as a last speaker. After the speaker's presentation, we will take on a panel discussion where we here in the room and everyone online can question the panel members about their opinions, and therefore to do that, therefore please, however you join this program, if you're on Zoom or you use the Jiangtong or the kosher platforms, please send your question online to us, and we will then present this to the panel members. Now, took me about 15 minutes to go there. But now I think done for me. Now I want to give the word to Professor Tscharntke as a first speaker. I'm not sure what's going on here with the technical side. We seem we lost a couple of connections. Professor Welp, are you still there? Do you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you very well.
Okay, then I think Professor, in the response that some speakers disappeared until they found the link again. I think best can you go with your presentation first then?
Sure, happy to do so. Then I will share my slides. Just a minute. Can you see these slides?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for the kind invitation to this panel, and I'm happy to share my thoughts about food security and biodiversity conservation. I'm with the Eberswalde University for Sustainable Development and with the Center for Econics and Ecosystem Management, where we do research on forests, agriculture, and protected areas. We are located close to Berlin in the northeastern part of Germany. And Harald Schneider, you highlighted the importance of feedbacks in the connection between agriculture and biodiversity conservation, and I would like to take a social ecological systems perspective in my short 10 minutes introduction. Something that we cultivate also in our master study program, Global Change Management, where we look at global environmental change and the underlying socioeconomic drivers of this change. And for this reason, I also decided to take food systems into the title, by which I refer to the demand side of food, so the dietary preferences, and to take it here right in the beginning, even though I think that there are many synergies between food security, let's say climate smart agriculture, regenerative agriculture, agro-forestry systems. I don't think that without a change in our diets into more sustainable diets, this equation really will work. Not in China and not in a global perspective. Which brings me to the sort of the system boundaries. I will change to the next slide. So today the focus is on food security in China, and many countries try to become more independent of the volatile world markets for agricultural products. Simultaneously in China, we know that the share of there has been a reduction of arable land in the last years due to urbanization, industrialization, but also land degradation, which includes salinization, contamination of lands, etc. However, imports and exports will continue to make sense also in a changing climate. It's very likely that the areas where food production is actually possible due to water resources or heat, or B, economically viable, this is going to change. And in that sense, we also need trade. And my colleague, Mr. Yin, who has been researching statistics, found out that the share of agricultural imports actually grew in China from 7 to 14% since 2016. And in our research project, junior research project Transact, we are also looking at the impacts of the Belt and Road Initiative to neighboring countries. So a systems view to the 30 by 30 target regarding land and ocean, which is a great achievement of international diplomacy on nature conservation. This has to be translated into national policies. It has to be put into practice and monitored. And with a remarkable net of protected areas in China and the ecological redlining, China is taking steps and preparing policies to reach this target. So what are the right leverage points to change the system to a more sustainable one? Protected areas obviously play an important role in this, but it's important not to compromise from these areas for bioeconomy goals, be it for fiber, food, or energy, as done in many countries. So it's important to have these protected areas. But it's also important to have not only these nodes, but also the links between the protected areas, corridors, which become much more important when looking at the changing climates. There are also interesting concepts like biosphere reserves, a UNESCO category, and there are 34 biosphere reserves in China, which serve as model regions for sustainable land use, for experimentation, for innovation, etc. And this brings me to some of the leverage points that I think can be part of the solution. And this is by no means comprehensive. This is rather related to the kind of activities we are doing in Eberswalde research projects. And I would like to highlight a few of them. So biosphere reserves can be strengthened to become model regions where regenerative agriculture, climate smart agriculture, organic agriculture are experimented and accompanied by research and monitoring. And our Biosphere Reserve Institute in Eberswalde is doing this. Something that also bears great potential, and together with colleagues, we have been doing research on agro-forestry systems. Bringing more trees into the landscape definitely is a good idea. This makes the landscape more diverse, and there are great needs to do this also in Germany, in the northeastern parts. China is a champion in afforestation and reforestation, but when looking at efforts, it's important that we do not only have monocultures, also in agroforestry systems, not only popular, and not only one hybrid or two hybrids, but actually looking how these can be done, shifted into more close to nature ecosystems by doing a local tree species, a variety of tree species. From a socioeconomic point of view, it's important to create value chain so that there are incentives for farmers to take care of trees. And we have been doing research on energy efficient housing by using agroforestry materials like wood, soil, agricultural residues, which is also connected to the Bauhaus Erde initiative, which tries to make cities and buildings rather sinks of carbon than sources. Which brings me to the third leverage points, which is related to urban areas and urban ecosystem enhancement. In many terms, urban areas have become very important for biodiversity conservation, and a lot can be done also in terms of improving green infrastructure. And with the great speed of urbanization in China, I think this needs to be taken into account when planning these new urban areas. Urban areas can also, to some extent, by urban agriculture, contribute to food security. And in a recent PhD study conducted at TU Berlin, the focus was on urban indoor agriculture. There are a lot of empty buildings. Where this is possible, there are also older people who are used to agricultural work, but may not be able to work in the fields anymore. But this could be sort of additional income for locally produced vegetables in indoor areas. Okay, and then I come to my last point, the dietary preferences. And the Eat Lancet Commission, which included top scientists from different disciplines, including health, etc., have sort of prepared suggestions how a global sustainable diet could look like. And having a diet which includes less meat brings very many synergies, including health issues, less cardiovascular diseases, less obesity, etc. And this can be influenced by state programs and education for sustainable development. As in my former home country, Finland, in the 70s, 80s, there was a big program which is considered to be one of the success stories of sort of influencing people's behavior to more healthy food. And people are becoming more and more concerned about climate change as well, because it's becoming more and more concrete through heat waves, forest fires, etc. And the connection between food and climate and biodiversity is part of this systemic understanding that needs to be there, not only in the academics, but also in the society as a whole. And finally, I would like to close here with a picture from a former airport area, the Tempelhofer Feld in Berlin, which is, among others, used now by different groups and initiatives to grow local food in urban settings. And by this, I would like to hand back to Harald for the moderation. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward for any questions later.
Thank you very much, Martin. Very nice starting point and very clear presentation. I really love this picture of the Tempelhofer Feld. Now I think we got our technical problems solved. Thank you very much. And now I think now as the problem, which sequence we will continue. I don't want to have German, Chinese. So then the reason why Professor Tscharntke accepted I jump over you will be the next speaker. Professor Jin, I would like to invite you to be the next speaker.
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Good. Okay. Thank you very much for the kind invitation. I'm so pleased and happy to join in this Sino-German workshop. Especially, I'm very glad to hear the German tongue of the language. You know, I have spent several years in Germany, and so happy to talk about the topics with our colleagues from China and from Germany. Yeah, you all know that I'm a lawyer, so it's kind of challenging for me to talk about the synergy between the food security and the biodiversity conservation. And at the very beginning, the Professor Schneider and just now the Professor Welp have expressed the relationship between the food security, food production, and biodiversity conservation. Actually, it has provided us the scientific background of the necessity of the synergy between these two important sectors. So I don't want to spend more time on this topic. So as a lawyer, what we should do is translate the scientific rules into the legal rules. So now the question is that how can we achieve the synergy between the food production and biological diversity. As mentioned by the two colleagues just now, we can understand that there's mutual impacts from food production on biodiversity conservation, both the good side and the bad side. On the other hand, is the same. And the biological diversity conservation can have the advantages and disadvantages on the food production. So from the legal perspective, what we should do is try to protect the synergy, to provide the legal mechanism to protect the possible synergy, and try to avoid the conflicts between the two sides. Now, so this is the general point, the legal approach into this way. But how to do that? So I think the most important approach is kind of a integrative and holistic approach, which introduce this kind of approach into the legal philosophy, the legal mechanism, legal principles, and the legal systems. For example, when we talk about the food production and biological diversity conservation, and these two sectors. But on the other hand, just now Professor Martin Webb also mentioned the impact of climate change. So when we talk about the synergy between the food production and biological diversity conservation, we should put all the two factors into a broader background. So we should consider the climate change, the biodiversity conservation, and the pollution control, and food production all together. Then we should to choose the best way to balance these different sectors. This is the first point. When we pass the legislations, when we discussion the drafts of the new legislation, or to modify the existing legislations, we must consider all aspects all together at the same time. That's number one. Number two is that what we can do right now is that we normally have 2 or 3 law branches for the different. Example, we have a food law system. We have a biodiversity law system. We have a climate law system. So we should integrate the considerations of other factors. For example, when we draft or implement the law on foods for food production, we should consider the impacts on the biodiversity, or the impact from the biodiversity. For example, we should revise our existing planning system, the existing, for example, the permit system, existing environmental impact assessment. For example, when we issued the EIA, environmental impact assessment, we should require the operators to consider the food production, the possible impact of food production on the biodiversity. On the other hand, when we developed the biodiversity the planning, for example, we should also consider its impacts on the social and economic aspects, especially on the food production. So this is a way to modify the existing legal systems to integrate with the considerations of food production, and the vice is the same. And the last is we can use the possible mechanism of judicial mechanism. For example, we have already in China, we have some kind of environmental courts and the tribunals, and it's specialized. We have about more than 2,000 specialized environmental and resources courts and tribunals to hear the environmental related cases. So when the courts, when the judge, when they hear the disputes, deal with the disputes, deal with the cases related to environmental, related to biodiversity, and we can require them or educate them to consider the possible impacts on food production, was virus. Yeah. So this is the general production. Actually, according to my understanding, that now in China's the agricultural law and food law, we have already some considerations on biological diversity. On the other hand, we have several days ago, we have the new law, is the ecological conservation law in Tibet, Qinghai Tibet plateau. So this law has also the requirement to consider the holistic consideration of different actions. So what I want to say is that we currently we not only have the ideas, the philosophies to achieve the synergy between the two sectors. We have already some good examples in China's legal system to achieve the synergies between the two sectors. So that's my very short presentation for my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Jin. for your contribution. And I think it's very important what you pointed out, that we need to have this holistic approach where we link our law systems, our economic systems into the biodiversity and not things as segregated things. Tasks need to think actually how we get all these conflicts together to get a good result. Thank you very much. Now, I want to move on. Then we go back to Germany. Professor Tscharntke, I think I would like to invite you now to share your thoughts with us.
Yeah, thank you very much. Sorry for the delay or for the technical project problems that I had, but now it's working hopefully, and hopefully you understand me well. Thanks very much for the invitation and for the nice introduction, Harald. I'm very glad to be able to present my to present my ideas about biodiversity conservation without yield loss, and will give a number of examples from our research to illustrate my points. First of all, which has been mentioned, we have dramatic losses in biodiversity, and it's a major challenge. And unfortunately, there were already many international and national initiatives, starting with the UN decade on biodiversity, which is gone, and now the UN decade on ecosystem restoration, and many other national initiatives. But still, there is a steep decline in biodiversity also in the recent decades. And it's clear that there are two major factors responsible for that. It's first of all, it's agricultural expansion and agricultural intensification. And this is at the cost of natural habitat, and often at the cost of biodiversity-friendly land use. These are the two major factors in my view. And when you talk about the biodiversity yield trade-offs in agriculture, as also Professor QIN just talked, and also Martin Welp, there are several possibilities. Classically, enhancing biodiversity, this is the first point, is often at the cost of productivity. This is in particular the case when yield gaps are very low, which is, for example, the case in EU or US cereal production. So there is little room left, and whenever you try to go for more biodiversity-friendly farming, you have typically a decrease of productivity. The second is we try to optimize trade-offs, that you have a maximum of biodiversity gains with your farming practices or measures at low or no costs, which can be easily done, I would say, in many tropical regions where the yield gaps are high, and there's much room to improve both productivity and biodiversity on farm. And the third point is that we have to keep in mind that biodiversity can be key drivers of productivity in terms, for example, of crop pollination, of biological pest control, or as I will show, also by big creatures such as bats and birds. When we talk about the political situation, organic farming is often regarded as a win-win alternative to intensified agriculture. But is it really the overarching solution of the biodiversity crisis? For example, in the EU, the aim is to come to 25% organic farming by 2030. In Germany, even 30%. But now we are still below 10%. So what are the benefits of organic farming? You have a third enhanced species richness per area, and usually you have no herbicide on arable land. But there are also big or great limitations which are often overseen. First and most important is that you have a high yield gap, up to 50% reduced, especially in wheat. You have biodiversity benefits only per area because of the reduced yield. When you calculate per yield, there is no richness increase anymore. Then it's a classical myth that organic farming does not use pesticides. Usually there are natural pesticides applied, for example, copper agents against pathogens in wine, in vegetables, in orchards, etc. Then very important, the certification for organic farming means that synthetic agrochemicals are forbidden, but there is no formal rule to protect semi-natural habitat, or there is such as hedges, flower strips, etc. There's also no rule to make your crop rotations more heterogeneous or more diversified. So you have also in organic farming often very simple crop rotations, and this means reduced, very low heterogeneity. Last not least, the field size of monocultures can be huge also in organic farming. This I would like to illustrate with these photos. On top left, you see a classical organic farm here in Portugal. It's an idyllic organic farm with Hofgate selling, etc. So this is what people often think organic agriculture look like. But top right, there's a huge monoculture, which is often the case in former Eastern, still in Eastern Germany, where you have huge fields which look very similar to conventional agriculture. And below on the left side, you have organic products grown in greenhouse conditions under plastic or grass. And top and bottom right, you have for example, in Spain, in Andalusia, huge landscapes covered by plastic. So of course, there's obviously no biodiversity involved, and lots of vegetables that you buy in supermarkets like sweet pepper, like tomato, like zucchini, etc. They come from these areas, and although they are certified organic products, they are not associated to any increased biodiversity. So what is important? Landscape heterogeneity is important, because the key driver of what is going on locally is the surrounding landscape and its landscape pool. So we have a key driver, a landscape key driver for a local effect. For example, your flower strips in very diversified landscapes are much richer in terms of flower visitation, or when you have fragments of dry, high diversity grassland, and these are all surrounded by agricultural land, then the species richness may also drop by a third. So what you need is increasing heterogeneity for biodiversity, which means you need an agricultural landscapes minimum of 20% semi-natural habitat. You need a higher crop diversity, crop rotation, more crops, species cultivated to make landscapes more heterogeneous. And you need smaller fields, because most species do not live on one field, but they depend on so-called spillover, on colonization and immigration of other fields to avoid extinction. When you have small fields, which is shown here by a study here with this graphic on the below right, when you have for example, a field size reduction from 6 hectares to 1 hectare per landscape. On average, you can have 6 times more species, so much more multiple species richness compared to what you get by organic farming. Pollination and biocontrol, what I said already, can directly enhance yield, which is very obvious for crop pollination. 75% of the most important crops globally are positively influenced by pollination. Crop quality is also improved, for example, by strawberries. Good pollination is improving or enhancing the shelf life. And this makes up a lot of monetary values per year. But also natural enemies can be important when you experimentally exclude natural enemies. For example, in cereal fields, you easily have a tripling densities of cereal fields, which is showed in studies across Europe. And also a similar effect you can have with oilseed rape. When oilseed rape is cultivated in landscapes which are rich, a lot of non-crop area, here from 3% to 50%, then you have a steep decrease in rapeseed damage, and you have an increase in parasitism, because parasitism is so parasitoids are the main biocontrol agents in the system. The most fascinating effect you may have in the tropics, and I will give examples here from our studies in cacao agroforestry. When you exclude birds and bats from cacao, and here in Peru, this is on top, you have only half of your yield in the end. Ants are very important in cacao. Also, when you have ants included or reduced by invasive ants, you have a third reduced yield. Endemic toads, so frogs, toads, can also be important when they consume mainly invasive ants and thereby help to improve the yield. Cacao pollination is limiting, so enhancing pollination, for example, also by hand pollination, can multiply cacao yield. So there are many options to combine in this system to combine yield with biodiversity conservation. Similar points are true for oil palm plantation. Recently, we had a publication showing that these enrichment of oil palm plantations with trees, with timber trees or fruit trees, with these tree islands, multiplies biodiversity, but is at no cost for oil palm, because oil palm benefit from these reduced canopy cover by this enrichment and have higher yield in this system. Then the same is what Harald already showed in his introduction, vanilla landscapes in Madagascar. When you have agroforests established on fallows, you have more endemic species. And interestingly, you can enhance overall species richness of many groups without compromising yield, because yield related variables are different. They are not affecting biodiversity. And we studied also macadamia nuts landscapes and also showed that birds and bats near by exclusion experiment are very important as consumers of insects, of pest insects. So this is the summary. You need, first point is you need landscape-wide measures to enhance farmland heterogeneity with small fields and high crop diversity and a minimum of 20% semi-natural habitat. Certification of crops should include targeted biodiversity-friendly measures. The third point, cacao agroforestry management can be done for high biodiversity with shade tree heterogeneity, with lots of bats and birds, insectivorous bats and birds, with higher ant diversity. Also amphibians can be important. Cacao pollination is an important point. And so I also showed examples of biodiversity gains without compromising yield. Thank you. That's all for now.
Thank you very much, Professor Tscharntke. Okay, now I think we move now to get the first round of the seminar done to the final speaker, Ms. Wang. Now you need to take my computer. Now where's your presentation? Oh, that's not on. Yeah.
Do I? Can you see me and hear me clearly? Okay. Thank you, DCZ, for inviting me, for inviting Foodthink to join this meaningful conversation. I am Ze'en Wang, an editor and researcher from Foodthink. As Professor Schneider just introduced, I'm not from any academic institute, and I'm afraid I don't have very solid data or theory frameworks to offer you, but I do have some stories to tell. And so that's why today I'd like to share with you a perspective from small organic farmers. It's a very interesting thing that Professor Tscharntke has just stated in his presentation, that organic farming has a series of limitations. So I want to make some clarification before I start. When I say small organic farmers, most of them are not organic certified, because we realize the flaws of the third-party certification system. And so the stories of small organic farmers, they are supported by PGS, that is a participatory guarantee systems, or they are supported by AFN, alternative food networks. So that's their stories I'm going to share. I'll just go quickly through the first two slides because I don't want to show off, because three experts have made it very clear that agriculture intensification is the main cause of biodiversity loss nowadays. And I simply want to stress that the reason I wrote Kunming-Montreal GBF conservation goal here is that we, as a non-profit organization that was focused mainly on sustainable food and agriculture, we also realized that what this GBF included, that is 30 by 30 target through protected areas and other effective area-based conservation is really important and can work together with what we are focusing on right now. So so these are some pictures of, the first one is the Otis tarda. I'm not sure if you have heard of it. It's a kind of wild bird in Beijing. And the second one is crested ibis. Both are important cases because these two kinds of birds, they rely largely on farmland. They find their food in the farmland. So these are two very good cases of how agriculture can serve as conservation, can serve as biological biodiversity conservation functions. And the picture down there is actually 8 bottles of old crop varieties, that is farmers in the system of farmers seeds. And I included this picture because, as Professor Schneider made it very clear, that in the Kunming-Montreal GBF, there are 3 different layers of conservation. And we think that old crop variety answers to that, the conservation of the diversity of the genes. So, and that's also, I will share a story later in my presentation. So I think these 2 slides are both, big words. They are both, very far from the daily life and the experience of organic farmers. But we also realized that in China, the stories of these organic farmers, they are actually way ahead of the Kunming-Montreal GBF. Right before, we realized that now it's really urgent to protect biodiversity through OECM, through other effective area-based conservation. They have made great contributions in their practices. So I will start with this Tianfuyuan Biodiversity Farm. Sorry, I don't have time to change the name, but it actually has an English name called God's Grace Garden. It was founded in 2001 by Miss Zhang Zhiming. It's that lady over there. So her farm is in Beijing suburb in Fangshan district, and it's about 150 mu, that large. So instead of, I think there is one thing that she said, it's very, very touching, is that why did she want to do a farm? Because she wanted to nurture life with life instead of the agriculture intensification, instead of the massive application of synthetic fertilizers and pesticides. She wanted to do it in a traditional and a pure way of and at the same time conserving biodiversity. So how did she do that? So this is a picture of the farm in 2001. That is right before she took over. It's just a conventional orchard, monoculture conventional orchard, and you can see, well, the bare ground and just look like lifeless. But this is all right. This is what it looks like after more than 15 years of effort. So you can see there are shrubs and wildflowers and weeds. It's not altogether a productive farm. You just don't. She doesn't just plant everything with every acre of her farm. She maintained those areas of shrubs, wild flower strips, as in our distinguished expert just shown to us. So these served as important habitats for all kinds of insects. And so she used this as to control the pest, as a way of pest control. And the second one is, you can see the cows, and also she raised sheep in her orchard. So she used cows and sheep as a way of weed control, so that you don't have to invest a lot of time and money to control your weed. And she also had all kinds of fruit trees like cherries and peaches and something I cannot name in English. And also the last picture is I think cabbages surrounded by weeds, but in conventional farming, you would consider this as detrimental, because you have so many weeds. How can your vegetables grow well? But Ms. Zhang managed to do that in her biodiversity farm, and she not only maintained a very diverse species, but also she, in her more than 20 years efforts, she managed to, I think, to use her own words, to quote her, is to mimic the natural ecosystem. It's not only about as many species as you can, but also try to think how do they work together and how can they benefit one another, instead of you just grow as many species as you can. And this also answers to that picture of the oat crop varieties. So this is a farmer we know. It's here. He is called Xiucai in the picture. In that group photo, and he is the one from the left. So he sells tofu in Beijing, and mainly through Beijing Farmers Market. And so where does all that kind of beans come from? They come from Heilongjiang province, which is his hometown, and so his parents are growing all these kinds of soybeans for him, and with the support of Farmers Seed Market and Farmers Seed Network, they managed to plant as many as 108 soy varieties in that land as small as 9.9 acre. So that's a very promising case as well. So after the first two cases, I'm sure a lot of you would have this question that, okay, we've seen what they contributed to biodiversity conservation. We've seen that they proved the possibility of the synergy between food production and biodiversity conservation. Then what? I think through my presentation today, a very key information I'd like to, hopefully I can convey through my presentation is that they're not sacrificing for an external goal to fulfill some to fulfill some grand goal from top to bottom. You know, they wouldn't think, oh, this is something written in the Kunming-Montreal global biodiversity framework, so we have to do this. No, because why they're doing this? Because they actually benefit from incorporating biodiversity friendly measures into their farming practice, which is, I think, Professor Tscharntke has made it very clear in his presentation. So I will, I tried I made a very rough sorting out. I had 5 items written out, and I think that's some benefits that we observed when we are talking with the farmers, when we are doing, when we visit their farms. So the first 2 are the most straightforward, yet are most ignored. That is, they provide high quality food, and by providing high quality food, they get better paid because of the high quality, and they had better income through a niche market or through the alternative food networks. And also the last 3 are I hope I can develop also through stories and cases in the next slides. Of course, so the first one is ecosystem services. So actually, that's also Professor Tscharntke mentioned in his presentation. So I have a story from Xinjiang. So this farm is called Taohuashi Farm. Well, this is the largest small organic farm in today's presentation. So he has 1,000 mu. The farm is that large, and it was founded in 2008. So his main produce is dry jujubes, and for the first few years he has to rely on he kept bees for pollination, but after several years of the restoration and rehabilitation of the local ecosystem, so now he has 300 moos of jujube trees relying solely on natural pollination. Well, as you can see, that is not a convention. Well, you would never see something like that in a conventional orchard. The weeds are as high as a human, but he did nothing to control the weeds, because that is beneficial for the soil. And apart from what he did in the orchard, he also had as many as 30% of his farm serving as semi-natural habitats. And I think that's actually above the standard that Professor Tscharntke just stated in his presentation. So that's a very, very good case of how biodiversity-friendly farming styles can actually enhance or improve ecosystem services. That's the case of Taohuashi Farm. And further, I have 2 more stories to tell. And they both, I think, answers to that the biodiversity-friendly farms have shown strong resilience under extreme weather. So this farmer here is called Da Hei, and his farm is called Grain Me Organic Farm. So he mainly produces wheat and barley. For those of you who are familiar with what happened in China for the past few months, you would know that unusual rain happened not only in Beijing and adjacent areas, but also in Shanxi province, in Henan province. So this is what the picture from above is what it looks like after the heavy rain that lasted, I think, more than 10 days. So Grain Me Farm also suffered from wheat lodging, but because of the good quality of the soil, as you can see from the picture from the bottom, and yes, you can see how good his soil is. And actually, this picture was taken when we visited him I think in May, and they experienced severe drought before the heavy rain. So this year was a very tough year for the farmers there. But because of the good quality of the soil, they only suffered yield loss as low as 20%, while the conventional farmers in that rural village suffered from more than 30% yield loss. And this is a similar case, but a nearer case. This is a Beijing organic farm. The farmer is called Liu Gang, and his farm is called Little Willow Organic Farm. He mainly produces vegetables for the city residents. And this is a picture of, not from his farm, but from one of the adjacent conventional farm after the unusual heavy rain in Beijing, if you remember, at the beginning of August. So the adjacent farmers suffered a devastating blow because all the corns are suffered from lodging. So well, that's beyond saving, but this is it did not show there. Oh, right. This is the corns from Mr. Liu Gang's farm, Little Willow Organic Farm. So after the heavy rain, after the heavy rain, it was sunny. Well, it lasted for a few days. After the recovery of photosynthesis, so his corns is able to recover from that heavy rain, but not so for the conventional farmers. So we believe these are two cases that small organic farmers, by incorporating biodiversity-friendly measures, they have shown great resilience under climate change. And in the increase of extreme weathers, we believe that their practices are more promising than some unsustainable way of production. And last, I'd like to stress upon the social recognition that they gained through biodiversity-friendly practices. Well, these four are pictures. The first one is actually Miss Zhang from God's Grace Garden, and the second one is Dun Zhi, the farmer in charge in Taohuashi Farm from Xinjiang. That's his sister-in-law. And that one is Liu Gang from Little Willow Farm, and the last one is farmer Da Hei, and he was giving he was doing something in Beijing Farmers Market. And so I want to say that they, besides that their farm benefited from their production itself, benefited from this biodiversity friendly way of producing food. They themselves also gained significant social recognition, especially from alternative food networks. And based on our very preliminary observation and research, we believe that small organic farmers have very, very strong incentives to conserve biodiversity. Dun Zhi, who is from Taohuashi, the farm in Xinjiang, he once said a very interesting thing because in Xinjiang, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the situation there. There are huge farms surrounding his farm, and he himself. Yes, military farms. That was surrounded by conventional farms, and Dun Zhi himself have witnessed numerous times that the birds were poisoned poisoned by the pesticides and herbicides. So she said this when we came there to visit him. He said, "I wish my farm were large enough so that the poisoned birds could have come to my place for food." He was actually running a pretty big farm, but he still wanted to protect all the birds in his ability. So that's very, very impressive. And the last one, I did not tell his story before, but oh, okay. Sorry. So I'll stop here. Yes, they have strong incentives to conserve biodiversity, but we also noticed that they have some realistic barriers and obstacles to stop them from from taking more measures towards better synergy through food production and biodiversity conservation. For example, because they don't know how long they can lease this land, or whether the lease will be renewed, and so they don't know. So that would naturally put a limitation on how much they invest on biodiversity conservation. So my whole point is, I think we should mobilize resources towards a better synergy between food production and biodiversity conservation. And I think in order to do that, we need to create an enabling policy environment as well as a market environment for smallholders to achieve their biodiversity conservation potential. And I think research institutes and NGOs and NPOs like Foodthink should work together to bring farmers' agency into the front stage when we talk about biodiversity conservation through agriculture. And last, this is what Foodthink has been doing this. We started this action plan together with Shanxi Conservation Center and Peking University Center for Nature and Society. We co-led an action plan for UN Decade Ecosystem Restoration, and we are really ambitious. We want to shift the world's largest agriculture and farmland ecosystem to biodiversity conservation. And that's also written in the action plan. And for the next few months and for the next few years, that's one of our main working focuses. And sorry if I spoke too long, and thank you for listening. And again, thank you for having us to join this meaningful conversation. And I look forward to have more interaction with three distinguished speakers as well as with online audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Oh, now we heard a lot of different perspectives, but actually a lot of overlapping similarities. Now we have a little bit time left for discussions. I heard that we have some online questions already, so it's made life easy. For others in local audiences invited also to ask questions, but maybe we start with some of the online questions.
Yes, there are some online questions. First question comes from anonymous attendee. The question is to Professor Tscharntke. How to show the benefits of biodiversity to farmers and make it into practice and enhance their awareness and development. Thank you. And another question, I read two questions at a time, okay? And the second question is to Ms. Wang. Compared to conventional farming, what is the cost of input and output of organic farming products? Does organic farming have advantages on the economic benefits if we take the yield into consideration? Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much for these questions. I think awareness of farmers of the benefits of biodiversity are obviously very important, and I think we try to do that. First of all, we have close connections to all farmers, so we have usually highly replicated field studies, so with with tens of farmers and farms involved, and all in the tropics, often in cooperatives, which is very nice. So cooperatives where farmers help each other in terms of farming, and when we show with these cages, for example, for birds and bats, that exclusion of birds and bats means such a decrease in food and productivity in yield, they become much more aware how helpful and important these birds and bats are. For example, bats, insectivorous birds, as you know, flying during the nights are not really well acknowledged often, and now it's more the vampire bat which is recognized, but they see how important they are. They even, for example, in agroforestry, spend the whole year in these high productive agroforestry systems coming out of the forest, the whole day there and feed on insects. So this awareness is very important. And then obviously you have situations where you have more bats and more birds. For example, when you have nearby a forest fragment left or forest left where they can breed, then this is helping to install practices that helps them. I think the second point was with organic farming compared to conventional farming. I think the profitability of farming is very much shaped by subsidies, as you all know. I think also in China, but in the EU, in the European communities, this is a big issue. For example, half of the income of each farmer in Germany, but also in the EU, is supported, or half of the income comes from the EU, so from national or EU-wide subsidies. And similar figures are also the case in the US and elsewhere. So you have no clear, because the subsidies are shaping the income, you have no clear idea what is more profitability. In organic farming, in addition comes that, as Wang nicely illustrated, there is a mainstreaming effect. People are so enthusiastic about organic farming and the food security that they gain by buying organic food, that in the end, the income level of organic farms are higher, much higher in Germany, at least at the moment, than of conventional farms. Also in wheat, where we studied this directly. So wheat cereals, although the yield per hectare is half of what you get in conventional fields, the organic farmers make still more money out of it, mainly because of the willingness of consumers to pay much more for organic products. So I think that's all for now. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for this anonymous attendee for your question. I think I will start. I will first answer your second question. That is, does organic farming has advantages on the economic benefits if we take yield into consideration? Actually, I think Professor Tscharntke has responded to that in the first question. I only have one point to add, that is yield. I don't think yield is the only relevant factor when we talk about the economic benefits of a farm. If you take subsidies and pricing systems into consideration, the whole problem is very sophisticated. And I only want to point out that because, well, based on our experience, based on our observation on the alternative food networks in China, the organic farmers, they have a right to price their own goods. So the yield is not, if you compare the yield, I'm afraid that's an unfair comparison, because they put so much efforts into growing their high quality food, and they had this alternative food network of consumers that are willing to pay them fair pays because of their hard work. So I don't think yield is the only relevant factor when we talk about the economic benefits. And considering your first question, that is, compared to conventional farming, what's the cost of input and output of organic farming products? That's a very good question, and I think that to some extent that's what Foodthink has been doing, because we realize the difficulties of from conventional farmers to transform into organic farming, because they need a whole set of technologies. They need to get rid of the past experience and technologies shaped by the conventional and chemical agriculture, so that they would need a new set of technologies to help them to transform to organic farming styles. And also because, as we said before, they face a set of challenges, for example, from policy, from the market environment. So I think Beijing Farmers Market is a very good example to have an impact on the market environment, to change the current market environment. And besides that, Foodthink is also trying to do some more serious campaigns to have an impact on current food and agriculture policies in China. And we want the government to see that these small organic farmers are actually they are actually contributing to both food production and biodiversity conservation, and we would like the whole policy environment to transform in favor of these, in favor of them, instead of the pollutionists and yes, the conventional farming. Yes. Sorry.
There's more questions. I would, these two questions are addressed to Professor Qin and Professor Welp. So the question to Professor Qin: the implementation of environmental laws may need professional assessment organizations. Could you please introduce a bit about the status and development of these organizations in China? How do we transfer scientific findings into laws? What can scientists do to speed up the transfer process besides publishing papers in academic journals?
Okay. Thank you. If my understanding is correct, so because we may have a different understanding about the professional assessment organizations. Actually, we have now in China the National People's Congress, that is China's parliament, and there's local parliament. They have a almost the kind of enforcement or implementation assessment. So the parliament at the national level and the provincial level, they will commission some research institutions, for example, the China Science Academy, or some universities, for example, Wuhan University, to conduct the assessment of the enforcement of the environmental law in practice. So I don't know exactly the professional assessment organization. So if But as to the assessment of the enforcement or implementation, we have already the official ones. As to the second question is about how to transfer the scientific findings into laws. So that's very important because the environmental law, including the biological diversity law and climate law, even the food production law, we must base the legal rules on the scientific rules. So nowadays, the legislators usually they will invite the scientists into the draft team. That means that when they drafting the articles or clauses, they have two groups of members. Then some of them are lawyers, some of them are scientists, and this is number one. Number two is that we have the call for comments system. So each draft, they will have the compulsory requirement must have this call for comments phase. So that means the scientists, including the NGOs and scientific organizations, can provide their ideas, advices, or suggestions to the draft laws. So then all these suggestions and comments will be reviewed, examined, and sometimes be included into the improved draft. So that's the my short answer to the second question.
Thank you. Now we have a question. We have a lot of questions. I don't know if we can get into all of them, but let's address each speaker first. So there's a question for Professor Welp. Martin, could you please talk a bit more about new nutrient guidelines in Finland? How to convince people to adopt healthier eating habits?
Okay, thank you very much. Actually, what I referred to was called the North Karelia project, which started in 1970s, ended in the mid-90s. And at that time, climate change, biodiversity loss was not a topic. It was really a public health campaign, not necessarily replicable elsewhere, but certainly something that can be an inspiration. Maybe nowadays, online influencers, TikTok stars are more influential than these kind of state programs, which was the case in the 70s and 80s. And I would like to also highlight that the kind of participatory guarantee systems that Ms. Wang mentioned, or the alternative food networks, can sort of be elements to bring sort of, let's say, a critical mass of people to support a transformation to more sustainable agriculture, which takes biodiversity conservation into account. I quickly found one link which I can share here in the chat to this program if anybody is interested in this North Karelia project. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have more questions. I think some of these questions are addressed to Ms. Wang.
How we actually do this time? I see we are about 4:30. I am afraid that we run a little bit out of time now. And therefore, maybe as a moderator, I will say a couple of words. We had a very nice, very interesting webinar today. First, I want to thank all the 4 speakers for giving very good and very inspiring statements. And especially I was personally pleased to hear more about the legal frameworks and how we integrate that ones, or also aspects how we think about more social-economic developments, which is often a little bit ignored. I'm living not in a big city, I'm living in a very small remote area. I have a totally different perspective of that as a consequence. But I think today we were only starting a very interesting discussion, because actually I think we discuss more about how this comes together. And one very positive outcome of today's webinar is therefore we actually had a very large audience. On Xiaotong we had more than 400 viewers. And in Kosher, we had about 1,200 viewers. Oh. It was rather positive, and actually this shows how important this topic is. And I hope we all can see each other and continue and discussing this in the future and contributing how we actually move forward. With that one, I want to thank you everyone who contributed today and attended. Thank you very much. Goodbye.